right, that's enough of that sound. Okay, where am I at? God, I haven't been in StreamYard in so long. Start cam. Hello. How is everybody doing out there? Hold on. No, we'll just stick with that. Yeah, it's been a while since I've been live, which is why I'm not expecting very many people to watch this stream, because I for my first live stream on my channel in probably 10 months, 8 months, something like that, I decided to not like set it up and tell people about it, because that's sort of the theme for this stream, the ImprompTuesdays, is I just kind of do it. And I had been looking at a YouTube channel for a couple of times the past couple of weeks, and a video popped up that they did. It popped up on my feed in YouTube, and I figured, after skimming through it, I was like, yeah, you know what? It's Tuesday. Let's do it. So yeah, I'm back, and right off the bat, I know there's only like a handful of people listening, but I apologize for the glare on my glasses. I don't know how to turn down my monitor's brightness when I go in through my Windows. I'm on Windows 11. The bar is there, but it will not let me select and scrub the bar, so I cannot lower my brightness, otherwise I would do that. The glare on my glasses is annoying me probably more than it's annoying you. But I say we get right into this and just go for it. Let's get this. Yeah, so I've been reading through some of the comments on this video. Some of them are pretty funny. So we're gonna look at just a couple of the comments here before we jump into the video, just because I think it's kind of funny. Seems that this video must have gotten like bombed by a bunch of atheists or something. It's the first comment that's not pinned. You truly speak like someone who doesn't know the first thing about science, pretending that science claims something it doesn't while engaging in circular reasoning with every single argument you make. Thanks for sharing. Now I'm curious what some of these. Anyway, I'm happy all these atheists are tearing apart this ludicrous video. Okay, that one's pretty. We'll like that one. I was just looking through these and I'm like, man, there are actually a lot of atheists commenting on this. And I thought we might read some of these comments and see if there's any. My brother in Odin, just the first point is insane. We're off to the races with solipsism right off the bat, but then saying it's misinterpreted. I wasn't advocating for solipsism, but once we get into this, you'll see why solipsism is. Wait, did I just see it? Yes, I did. Captive Desk. How's it going, Dave? Don't know if you're out there. Don't know if you will be out there. Shout out to Captive Desk. An atheist doesn't believe in God. Your questions are not applicable. In the theist worldview, all the laws of logic, morals, physical laws, etc. all go out the window on a whim from God. There is no basis for anything when it all can change on a whim. That doesn't happen, though, in reality. What science works with is the natural world that doesn't change on a whim with a magic word, and theists cannot demonstrate that these things happen or ever have. Decent point. Decent point. I knew I saw a profile picture I recognized. Wonder if there's anybody else here that I know. No, it definitely saw. Oh, answers in atheism. Shout out to Mike. Before you can read the Bible, you must make the assumption that the real world Bible exists. How do you support that prayer? That's funny, using their logic against them. Gotta love it. Man, there are a lot of atheists that have commented on this. I wonder if it got shared somewhere, or is a majority of their like followers, subscribers, atheists who don't know. This is an interesting place to have paused the video. That's a face you want to wake up next to, isn't it? Anyway, let's start the video. Let's see what the Joel has for us here.
Is Christian faith
Wait. Before I do that, I have to make sure. I'm going to reshare it just to make sure that I did get the audio. Yes, the audio is on. Share. Okay. We should be good to go. Just, you always got to make sure you got that audio. There's no point in reviewing a video if you people can't hear it. So let's continue with this.
Really the enemy of science? This is what we hear all the time. But what if the scientific... Is Christian faith really the enemy of science? This is what we hear all the time. But what if the scientific method itself relies on assumptions that only make sense if Christianity is true? That is what we're going to be talking about in this episode. My name is Joel Sedekase. I'm the president of the Think Institute, and it's my job to help equip regular believers to become the worldview leaders that their families.
The first thing I can say, and if I remember correctly, this music does not, the background music he's got going does not play through the whole video, if I remember correctly. But I must say, it should be turned down a little bit compared to his voice. Like, you can still hear him in what he's saying. Don't get me wrong, but seems just a little loud there for my tastes, at least.
And churches need. If you're at all interested in science, Christian apologetics, the defense of the faith, or passing on your faith to the younger generation, this episode is going to be for you. Step 1 is observe the world. The scientific method begins by...
So right off the bat, there is one thing that I do want to say, just because I think it is an important point to make. Science and theism, I would not say, are at odds with one another. I don't think that science and theism are, I don't want to use the word conflict in any real ways. Science and religion, any specific religion, I think do. We can, just pick a religion, Christianity, Islam. There's going to be, regardless of what the variety of Christianity is, there's going to be claims that are made by Christianity as a religious institution that are fundamentally dissimilar to the claims made in science. And I think this is true for any organized religion. There are claims that those religions make are dissimilar, tells us, and obviously vice versa, such that you either have to abandon the claim that the religion makes, or you have to abandon the claim that the science makes, but you can't hold to both. So, the Bible describes the world being created through an extraordinarily weird process in 6 days. Science clearly tells us something different. Both cannot be true at the same time, and you'll notice that most people reject what the Bible says about the creation of Earth and potentially the entire universe compared to what science says. Most people just go with what the science says and say, well, the religion's clearly got it wrong here. But that's the point that I'm making, is that when it comes to any specific religion, either certain religious claims have to be abandoned or certain scientific claims are not accepted. But I don't think that's true with just theism more broadly. So I would say that while science and theism are not really in conflict with one another, I think that science and religion, pretty much any religion, are.
Examining the world around us, this is going to be the precursor to everything that's going to follow. So what is the fundamental assumption that goes into this first step? It assumes that there is an external world to observe. There is a reality out there for us to observe. That means that we are not just brains in a vat sitting on a shelf somewhere. There actually is a real world. Given atheism, why would we think that there is an actual world? If atheism is true,
I'm not sure what atheism has to do with that. Atheism is just a position on one claim. That claim is God exists, and atheists say, no, that's false. But I guess more broadly, if you are an atheist, you would think that there is an actual external world because you engage with it every day. You exist in it. You live in it. You experience it. Now, somebody like Joel would probably bring up solipsism here, but that just ignores all of the extraordinarily strong arguments against solipsism. While we can't prove solipsism false, that in no way, shape, or form means that there aren't really good arguments against solipsism, which clearly there are. So I just don't see why this would be a problem for an atheist.
Then everything that we experience is purely the result of sensation and things going on inside of our brain. But given that worldview, there's no reason to think that there is actually an external world outside of our own minds. And that might sound crazy because everyone lives like there is an external world out there. But that's exactly the point. Atheism can't explain that intuition that we all have that there is really a world out there to observe. But can Christianity? Of course. The very first verse in the Bible is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then as you continue reading in Genesis, you see that God created the man from the dirt, placed the man in the garden, and told him to observe the world, to take dominion over the world.
You know, I could be wrong. I would bet that Joel thinks there was a literal Garden of Eden. And I've always found that kind of strange. Like, where was it on the planet? A lot of them say somewhere, like, I want to say like Saudi Arabia or something like that. Who knows? But for those that do think there is a legitimate, like the Garden of Eden was an actually real place on the planet, where was it? And how do we know that's where it was? Just a question I've always had.
The world. And the very first job that God gave Adam was to name the animals. The Christian worldview makes perfect sense of this idea that there is an external world, but atheism can't do it. This is the first assumption that science makes.
It seems that I don't know, that he just described how the Bible says that God created the world and humans and all of that stuff. I don't see how that somehow like how does that somehow establish that Christians are better off than an atheist would be in the assumption. It's not, assumption might not be the right word, that there is an external world. So because the Bible tells us how it thinks God did it, that therefore that means solipsism is false. I don't know. That didn't seem like a very good reason to think that Christians are any better off than atheists. Of course, I think Christians have good reasons to reject solipsism. I don't think those are going to have anything to do with Christianity or its particular beliefs or traditions, but yeah.
Before we even begin the scientific process, it works perfectly well with Christianity. It does not work with atheism. Moving on. Step number 2, ask a question. Before we begin our scientific experimentation, we need to ask a question. We've observed the world, and now we're going to wonder about the world. You hear atheistic scientists like Richard Dawkins talk about wonder. When they talk about wonder, they're talking about this second step of.
I love how I just love it every time they talk about us scientists who are atheists. It's either Richard Dawkins or it's Neil deGrasse Tyson, who I'm pretty sure has said that he doesn't consider himself an atheist. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe he's changed his mind. But the last time that I can remember him being asked about that, he said, I think he said something along the lines of he wouldn't describe himself as an, like that. I want to say it was something more like an apatheism, like that he just doesn't care whether there's a God or not. That doesn't have anything to do with science and utilizing science as a means of understanding the world. That, at least the last time I saw him address the issue of God's existence, that seemed to be, if memory serves, what his response was. But I just love it how they always bring up the same people. It's strange.
The scientific method, which is to ask a question. But to ask a question presupposes the existence and reality of the laws of logic. Why? Because
I'm not sure I agree with that. I think that before logic existed as any sort of systematized, linguistic schema in human society, I think that humans were probably still asking questions. I would just need to hear some sort of defense for that claim. Like, why should I think that asking questions presupposes logic? I don't really know what's even being said there. That sounds confusing to me. Yeah, what?
Ask a question assumes that there is an answer and that the answer is.
I don't think that's true. I don't think that asking a question assumes there is an answer. I think we might like there to be one. We might expect one, but I don't think it assumes that there is one. I think most people would probably agree with me when I say that there are likely unanswerable questions that are out there.
True, and its negation is not. That is the second law of logic, the law of non-contradiction.
What? Hold on here.
That is, answer is true. The question assumes that there is an answer and that the answer is true and its negation is not. That is the second law of logic, the law of non-contradiction. Every time you or I ask a question about this world, we're assuming there is some truth corresponding to that answer. And if the
Again, I just not necessarily. I don't think asking questions assumes, number one, that there's an answer, or that, number two, any answer you get will be true.
the answer is true, the opposite of the answer or the negation of the answer is not true. If A is true, then not A is not true. We call this the law of non-contradiction. Now, does an atheist have a reason to believe in the law of non-contradiction? The law
Yes, they do.
of non-contradiction is one of the three laws of logic, along with
One of the three laws of classical logic.
the law of identity and the law of excluded middle. These laws govern all thinking and
They do not govern.
all truth. They are not made of matter, obviously. How could a law be made out of matter? And they exist necessarily in every conceivable.
No, they don't. I'm a nominalist about abstractus, so I would say the laws of logic don't exist at all. They're not things in the world. They're features of conceptual schemas humans come up with as a means of systematizing the I guess you could say processes through which we understand and communicate aspects of ourselves and the world.
World. They exist absolutely. There are no exceptions to them. They are authoritative.
Well, that's not true, because there are multiple forms of logic where one, potentially more than one, of the classical laws of logic, which Joel is correct with the three laws of logic that he stated, the law of identity, the law of non-contradiction, and the law of excluded middle, are the three laws of classical logic. But there's non-classical logics out there. I think there's forms of logic where any one of the three could be false. I think there's forms of logic where the law of identity is not true. That one would be a little weird to me. But I certainly know that there are forms of logic where, like, I think dialetheism is the one where there can be true. Is that the one where there can be true contradictions? I can't remember. My memory isn't serving me well here. The point being that there are systems of logic utilized and defended by legitimate logicians in which one or more of the classical laws of logic does not hold true. So the idea that they're absolute, they're necessarily true, well, that's not the case. I don't think most people, even if you talked to a logician or a meta-logician who did hold to the laws of classical logic, that did hold the classical logic, would probably still disagree with this. They would say something like, I think, well, I hold to classical logic, but to say that they are necessarily true and that they are true absolutely is no. There are a bunch of people who think that they're not true, who do not hold to one or more of those laws. So,
and descriptive of the world. They are universal, meaning they're true everywhere, omnipresently.
Again, that wouldn't be true re everything I just stated.
And there are three laws of logic, and none of them is more important than the other. They are all equally ultimate to one another. Now, can atheism account for laws like this? See, laws have to come from a lawgiver if they're going.
No, they don't. I mean, even if I granted, yeah, laws have to come from a lawgiver, I would just say that lawgiver is humans. We came up with the laws of logic, which we did come up with the laws of logic. So, okay, I grant you there's a lawgiver. That's humans. When he says, how do atheists account for this? Well, when you say account, are you asking how is it that if somebody doesn't believe in God, that they accept the laws of life? Some of these questions I think they're genuine questions. I think he wants answers to them. I think he's asking them like in good faith, but I think that the questions largely are misplaced. What do you mean? Why should I suppose that an atheist can't account for the laws of logic? What precisely do you mean by accounting for the laws of logic? There's a couple of ways, at least, that I could interpret that question. So yeah, I don't. It seems that there's this baked in assumption that atheism makes a bunch of claims about a variety of other things other than the existence of God, which it does not do. Atheism, it doesn't, and it isn't trying to account for logic, the laws of logic. It isn't trying to account for truth or what truth is as a concept or anything like that. It's merely a position on one particular proposition. That's it. That's where it starts and that's where it ends.
Going to be binding and authoritative. And the laws of logic certainly are. And I say they do. Why? I'm contradicting them. Because if the laws of logic aren't authoritative, then there's no reason why we can't just contradict ourselves. Nonsense can be true, truth is meaningless, and logic doesn't exist. But of course, we all know the laws of logic really do exist. They really.
Well, I don't think they do. And I'm not. I would be curious to know what the majority of subject matter experts, so those working in like logic and meta logic and things of that sort, I wonder how they view the concept of logical realism, that logic, or which would include the laws of logic, are like real things in the world. I don't think they are. If I had to guess, I'd say most logicians probably aren't logical realists. Maybe they are. I'm not really sure, but I am not. I would contend with that claim that we know the laws of logic exist. I don't think they do. I think they're conceptual.
really are real. And the laws of logic are propositions. They are statements. Statements can only exist in a mind. You can write down the laws of logic on a piece of paper. That's just paper. There's no meaning there until someone reads it, and then the law is transmitted into meaning in the mind. So the laws of logic must exist in a mind. That mind must be absolute, must be
Wait,
authoritative, must be higher, beyond human beings, because the laws of logic are still true even if you and I die.
well, I don't think so, because I don't think there would be laws of logic if like all humans died. There would have been nobody to come up with them. And this idea, well, they're only true, in a mind. Well, yeah, they're a feature of our linguistic schemas. So of course they're only true. Like languages are things understood by agents. If you didn't have agents, you wouldn't have languages. It wouldn't make sense to talk about understanding things. So that seems, like, of course these things depend on minds. I don't know why I would suppose that mind is absolute and all the other things that he said it is. I didn't really get an argument for any of that either.
Does atheism have a mind like that? Is there a mind
Well, atheism does not. I don't. Of course it does. Atheists do, however, and that's the important part.
that is absolute, omnipresent, objective, universal, knowable, and three in one? Well, of course not. There's no mind like that in any atheistic worldview. But Christianity, on the other hand, has exactly
Yeah, but why do we need a mind like that? What would be the argument?
what we need for logic to exist. We have the triune God of Scripture. The triune God of Scripture is three in one. There are three laws of logic. There are three persons in the Trinity. God is three and God is one, just like logic. God
That seems to. That doesn't seem to make mathematical sense. This thing is this one specific digit, and it's also this one other entirely different digit at the same time. What? What are we even saying?
is not made of matter. God is spirit. God is the most powerful mind in existence. So the laws of logic can be grounded in his mind. And God is absolute in his authority. And
You'll hear this word grounding a lot from theists. If you're listening to this, when you hear that, I want you to do one thing. Just one thing when you hear that, when you hear a theist say grounded, or you need something to ground it, or it has to be grounded in something. Ask them what concept of grounding they're taking. And what do you mean by grounding? What sort of relation? Are you describing a relation? If so, what kind of relation? ask them to break the concept apart and really explain it to you. And I will bet that 8 times, if not 9 times out of 10, that person will fail to do that.
And he is omnipresent. He is everywhere. That's exactly what we need for logic to work, for logic to make sense. And we have to assume that logic is real in order to ask a question, which is vital for science. So yet again, the scientific method is totally in line with Christianity. And let's move on. Step number 3, formulate.
What's with these steps? Step number 4. But does he just go through like all of the steps of the classical scientific method? Huh, interesting. All right.
Formulate a hypothesis. To formulate a hypothesis is to make a prediction. Now, to make a prediction,
hypotheses can make predictions, but forming a hypothesis isn't making a prediction simpliciter. Hypotheses are usually going to be more broadly explanatory, where they're at least attempting to explain some observed phenomena in the world, and they might make predictions that we can then go and run tests to see if those predictions come true. If they do, that's usually corroboration of the model, or not corroboration, that's not the word I want to use. Confirmation of the model for the most part. It really depends on the strength of the prediction. If it's a novel prediction, those sorts of things. But formulating a hypothesis is not just making a prediction about something. It's a bit more broad than that.
We are using a faculty that we call intuition. Intuition is a...
That's... What? God, I hate the word intuition. I feel like I kind of agree with Lance Bush here a little bit, like that intuition is, well, I don't know if he would say it's necessarily like a meaningless term, but I'm just not sure what an intuition is supposed to be. Like, is it a truth tingle? Is it tingles that you get when you think something is true? Like intuition's playing a role here. I would need to know what an intuition actually is. Oh, hey, Lance is in the chat. I would need to know what is an intuition before I'm going to grant that they're a part of the scientific method, which I feel comfortable saying that no, they're not. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Vital truth.
What do I know about philosophy of science?
You have, and I have, aimed at truth. If we didn't think it was aimed at truth, we would never form hypotheses. Hypotheses are predictions about the way that the future is going to be. Can atheism ground and establish the existence of our intuition? In short, no. If you are an atheist,
and we will not get an explanation for why. It will just be no, but God can, but no explanation for why atheism can't. And this is the thing, is that just because you have some explanation for X, whether or not it's a good explanation, we'll set that aside for now. Just because you have some explanation for X does not mean other people don't also have an explanation for X. You can't say, well, you can't explain X because I said that you can't explain X. That's not how it works. You have to show how either A, they have no explanation, or B, their explanations are not sufficient.
Most likely you believe that we evolved from lower life forms through natural selection, time and chance acting on matter and biology over millions and billions of years. There was nothing in that process, no mechanism within that evolution that would create a mind that can intuit truth.
Well, I don't know what it means to intuit truth, but the thing is that if understanding the environment that you live in an accurate and meaningful way tends to lead to greater chances of survival, that would definitely be a trait that would be favored by the evolutionary processes. This idea that, well, evolution is just aimed at survival, so I don't know why we would be truth-seeking agents. That's probably because truth-seeking is something that generally increases the chances of survival. Like I said, having a greater understanding, a more accurate understanding of your environment is likely to lead to you surviving more things. and thus passing on those genes of truth-seeking.
In the atheistic scheme, plus evolution, all that there is a brain that is aimed at survival, not truth. Intuition, what's that? Truth-seeking faculties, what's that? Given atheism, there's no reason to think that we could form a hypothesis about anything. Now, an atheist is going to object. They're going to say, we form hypotheses all the time. To which I would reply, yes, you do. And you do so inconsistently with your atheism. Because it's the Christian worldview that believes that we are made in the image of God.
Yeah, atheists, they can't think. They don't know what truth is. They can't say truth things because they're atheists. They just have a brain. That's all. They just want to survive.
It's the Christian worldview that tells us to observe the past in order to make predictions about the future. It's the Christian world that tells us to observe the past in order to make predictions about the future. It's the Christian worldview that says that we can.
I like how he's just going on like, yeah, the Christian worldview is the only worldview that tells us that we should look to the past to understand it. No. Humans have been doing that since before there was Christianity, so I don't understand that at all. Really? What? There's been smart people out there that have said, hey, this is how something was in the past. This is how I think it's going to be in the future. Hundreds of years before there was Christianity. Hundreds of years before Jesus ever walked the earth. What?
Love. Love cannot be tested in a lab. Love cannot be seen.
So, I would say that depends on how one understands love as an emotion. Whether or not it can be observed in a lab. I feel like a lot of neuroscientists, maybe neurobiologists, would say, "Oh yeah, we can observe love in a lab." But again, I think it just kind of comes down to how if you understand love as being some ethereal, non-physical thing, I don't know, that's out there, then you're probably not going to think that. But if you think that love is a human emotion that's based in chemicals and their reactions in the brain and functions or processes that might be related to or arise out of that, then you would probably think that to some extent you can observe love in a lab.
Heard, touched, tasted. You can't love with your five senses. Love is...
Well, that's not true. Like, you can express love through a variety of the senses. What? What?
Knowing that someone loves you is associated with our intuition. And the Bible absolutely supports the existence of intuition and the formulating of hypotheses, but atheism does not.
I would love to know where in the... Maybe the Bible does talk about intuitions. Maybe the general concept that people are trying to capture there is expressed somewhere in the Bible. I wouldn't know. I don't really care. So, yeah, I don't know. That seems like just a weird claim to make.
The scientific method is in perfect agreement with biblical Christianity and not with atheism. Let's move on to step number 4. Research the question. When you're doing your research, is it okay to allow your personal biases and prejudices to taint your research? Obviously not. You want to be as unbiased as possible. In fact, the scientific community would agree that you have an ethical, moral obligation to report and research in an unbiased, fair way. Now, can atheism ground ethical obligations like that?
Yes. I'm still not sure what we mean by grounding here. I'm not quite sure what that's meant to capture. But as I would understand the concept of grounding, to the extent that I can, yeah, atheists can do that.
An atheist might say, sure, because reporting and researching in an unbiased way is just the way that you get the most accurate results, and we value accuracy. That's a value judgment. But what is the value theory of atheism?
Atheism doesn't have a value theory. It doesn't need one. Atheists might have some particular axiological dogma that they subscribe to. I don't really know why that would be relevant here. Maybe I'm just not seeing it.
Is it just our personal preference? Because if we didn't do that, we wouldn't have a scientific community. Exactly right. But atheism gives no grounding for objective, moral, ethical absolutes.
Yeah, but that assumes that there are objective moral absolutes. I would reject that. I think for good reason.
Ethical and moral laws come from an ethical or moral lawgiver and authority. And if you want to say we all just agree that this is the way that it ought to go, without an absolute ethical authority that establishes the moral obligation to behave in a certain way, there's nothing stopping any scientist from simply saying, that's what the community says, but I'm going to do something different because
Well, yeah, there is something stopping them from doing that. Their own person. I love how there's this idea that, like, if morality isn't objective, people can't have very similar preferences that, like, push human development forward. What? That just a bit confusing to me.
I need this experiment to yield the results that I want. And you go, oh, but that would destroy science. No one would ever do that. Really? You don't think that scientists ever let their prejudice and their bias into their research?
Sure, but it honestly probably doesn't happen. Doesn't seem to happen all that much. I mean, it happens, but it doesn't seem to be commonplace.
And are you okay with that? Are you okay with them doing that? Obviously, you're not. But atheism can't ground morality and ethical obligations. What about Christianity?
It can, though. I mean, atheism does it because atheism, again, is just one position on a given proposition. But atheists can certainly have some sort of grounding or foundation for their moral views. Atheists can hold to objective moral. I mean, if you look at the 2020 Phil survey, according to that survey, most philosophers are moral realists and most philosophers are atheists. So are most philosophers just dumb and don't know anything? I mean, some people might think that, it's just, but how do you explain that?
Christianity.
By the way, I'm not saying that those philosophers are, I mean, I think they're right on the atheism part. I don't think they're right on the moral realism part.
Have any principles in it that say that it's wrong to be prejudicial and biased? Of course. God hates what the Bible calls unequal weights and measures. God does not show favoritism, and God tells us not to show favoritism. God is not partial.
God doesn't show favoritism, but if you don't believe in him, you will suffer for eternity. Makes sense.
We are not supposed to be partial. We are supposed to be objective and unbiased and to report the truth. So, Christianity gives a perfect foundation ethically and morally for science that atheism does not. Let's move on to step 5. Plan the experiment. An experiment is a test that you run on a limited sample size. And then from that experiment, you're going to extrapolate out ideas and conclusions about everything. You're going to take a small sample and you're going to say, based on this small sample and the way that it behaves, I'm going to assume that the rest of creation, the rest of the world works in a similar way. What is the assumption that goes into the...
I mean, I suppose that's one way that an experiment could be conducted. I don't know if I would agree that's the only way that experiments are conducted.
Formulation of an experiment. It is the assumption of inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning or induction is when you take a limited sample size or a part of something, and by learning about that part, you can then draw conclusions about the whole. We do this every time we go to Costco and my kids take a sample of the food. When they take the sample, what do they want? They want you to buy whatever the food is. The reason
I think that's a poor way to characterize induction. Induction, I think, is more this idea that we're sort of reasoning from the way that things have been. The sun has risen every morning since before I've been alive. I'm expecting it to rise tomorrow. But I mean, we make those expectations based off of more than just the fact that it's risen every other morning before. I mean, we know that the Earth rotates. I mean, there's a variety of other observed phenomena that play into that. But yeah, I don't think that was the best way to characterize induction.
They do that is because they understand that based on the way that the sample tastes, the whole package is going to taste the same. They're engaging in induction or inductive reasoning without even knowing it. And we do this all the time. It's impossible to experiment on all the oxygen or boron in the universe, but you can experiment on a small sample size. And from that, you can extrapolate out what's going to happen to the whole, and you can draw conclusions about it. If you didn't assume this, you would never plan. Atheism cannot ground the idea of inductive reasoning. There is no reason to assume.
Yeah, this video is like every time we go through one of these points, he's just going to be like, yeah, atheism can't ground this. And then we're going to get no explanation, number one, as to what sort of grounding concept he has, and number two, how atheism is attempting to ground these things, which I would argue that it's not. And then three, why atheists, at least, could not ground these concepts. I definitely feel like that's gonna, and you know what, the thing here is, the reason that I think that's how this video is going to go is because that's how this video has been going. Induction. I'm using it right now, and I'm an atheist. Oh no, don't tell Joel.
Assume that a limited sample size will be like the rest of everything else. There's no principle of consistency between the sample size that you just so happen to select and the rest of that substance in the universe. How could you possibly know what the rest of that substance in the universe is going to behave like? You can't. In fact, you can't even assume that you can know even 1% about all of something in the universe. But the atheist is stuck because he or she has to plan an experiment assuming that it's going to be a meaningful endeavor, assuming that this experiment is going to yield some kind of fruitful knowledge about all of the universe. They don't like the term creation, obviously. But there's nothing.
Well, of course not. The universe wasn't created.
In atheism, there's no unifying principle between a sample size and the rest of everything else.
That's because atheism isn't science. Why would atheism need that?
Why would we assume that a substance behaves the same way everywhere?
I think that's probably going to have something to do with these things called the laws of physics and the theories that we have that utilize them to explain and understand the world around us.
Holding that together,
I mean, what do I know?
There's nothing in atheism that yields that assumption or conclusion. And you might say atheists have to do that, otherwise we could never engage in science. I agree. That's why atheists are being inconsistent when they engage in science and plan their experiments. Christianity, on the other hand, believes totally in inductive reasoning. The Bible says, come, let us.
So is he implying that atheists don't believe in inductive reasoning? Oh, that's funny.
Reason together. We have reasoning. We have our ability to make a small observation and to gain insight and truth about the entire world. In fact, Proverbs tells us more than once to look at an ant, something as small as an ant, to gain insight and truth about the whole world. If you believe the Bible, you have a perfect reason to believe that inductive reasoning is a thing and is possible and is valid and is useful. The scientific method assumes something about the world that doesn't make sense given atheism, but makes perfect sense if Christianity is true. Next step.
I didn't hear an explanation as to why, but maybe somebody else in the comments did. You should share it if you did.
Step number 6, run the experiment. What does this presuppose? The validity of our sense experience. Our 5 senses, sight, hearing, taste, touch, and smell. These are the faculties that we use when we engage in a scientific experiment. Remember back in high school chemistry?
Well, not all scientific experiments. Like the experiments that are run at the Large Hadron Collider, we're not using our 5 senses because they don't. That's not how. Like, I don't know how you see an electron. That what does that mean?
When you pour the two
do quarks have a taste? Are they salty? Well, of course not, because they're smaller than salt, so that wouldn't make any sense.
Chemicals together and there was a puff of smoke and you could smell that pungent smell. You're using your 5 senses. You see the flash of light. Do you touch a substance and you see how the texture changes when you add a different substance? These are essential for running an experiment And given Christianity, we've got perfect reason to trust our five senses. Not in an infallible way, but the Bible validates our sense experience. As a matter of fact, John.
That's good that you have the Bible to validate your sense experience. I feel like most atheists would say that their everyday, just like being alive and engaging with the world, validates their experiences and the fact that they have five senses that they can use to understand things. That's at least what I would say myself.
Starts out his epistle in First John talking about what we have seen with our eyes and touched and heard with our ears. John is saying that we can trust the deliverances of our five senses. So if you're a Christian, the Bible validates your five senses and your sense experience. As an atheist, you have no idea if what you're seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, smelling is in any way connected to reality.
Yeah, I do. The fact that it's connected to reality. Reality is what furnishes those again, horrible place to pause. I don't care though. Reality is what furnishes your sense. Like, you wouldn't see if there weren't things there containing electrons to scatter the electromagnetic radiation that is then detected by your eyes. So the fact that I'm seeing things tells me there's an object there and it's made of electron, or I should say has electrons. So I don't need a Bible to know that. I don't need a God to know that. I don't know why anybody would think that we do, unless they didn't understand how the senses work.
All you know is the chemical reactions that are going on in your brain, or at least what you think you're experiencing. The Christian believes that our bodies and our minds were created by God in order to interact with the world. That necessitates that they be valid and that they give us valid conclusions. Does the atheist believe that our five senses were designed by someone? And I don't mean design like you get with evolution. Evolution is not design, it's a blind process. The atheist has no reason to believe that our five senses are in any way, shape, or form reliable. Not if atheism is true.
Except the fact that they're reliable.
But the scientific method assumes and necessitates that the five senses are valid in order for us to be able to run this experiment. The scientific method makes perfect sense with Christianity and not with atheism. Let's go on to the next step. Retool the experiment. This is where we are going to analyze the experiment that we've been engaging in. We're going to see if the parameters are correct, and we're going to adjust the numbers. We're going to adjust the measurements of what we are testing. Now, this happened when I was about 18. I went out to Salt Lake City where my uncle was living at the time. My uncle was a pain researcher, and he asked if he could run an experiment on me. And I said, yeah, sure, let's do it. So what he did was he had me place my thumb on this little device with a piston that would push down on my thumbnail. I was just supposed to tell my uncle when it really hurt. And it would push down with a certain amount of pressure. Then I would say, okay, it hurts now. Here's the problem. I had a pretty high pain tolerance, and I would just max out the machine. What ended up happening was my uncle.
Oh yeah, man. Oh, I'm so tough. I put my thumb in this machine that squeezes it really hard, and it squeezed my thumb really hard, but it didn't hurt. Yeah, no, yeah, don't fuck with me.
Had to scrap the experiment and retool it with different parameters so the piston would have more pressure because it wasn't pushing down hard enough for the experiment to yield useful results. He analyzed the data, he went back and retooled the experiment. A scientist has to assume that there are valid principles of mathematics, that numbers exist and are meaningful if you're going to retool the experiment. The number 5 has to mean the same thing tomorrow as it did yesterday. Principles of mathematics have to be real. But principles of mathematics are immaterial, they're absolute, they're universal.
Well, I don't think they have to be real. I'm not a mathematical realist, so yeah.
Universal, they are objective. Does atheism have anything like that in its worldview? It's what we might call metaphysics, its view of reality.
Actually, yeah. So a lot of like philosophers of mathematics I'm not going to say most, but a decent chunk are mathematical realists. I think most. I think most relevant philosophers prefer structuralism, as it's called, but I'm not sure whether structuralism would be realist or anti-realist. I don't know if it can exist in both. But there is a metaphysic called Platonism. It's this idea that there's this realm of perfect forms of things that contains concepts like universals and what have you, and that this is the realm where these kinds of immaterial concepts exist. This doesn't require a god. In fact, some theologians would say that Platonism, as a metaphysical view, is not congruent with theism, or at least specifically Christianity. William Lane Craig, for instance, is a nominalist for this reason. So, because I think he takes it that like a Platonist realm, what is it, like threatens the aseity of God, or it's something, I can't remember exactly what it is. Somebody in the chat might know. I can't remember, but I do know that Craig is a nominalist.
Is there anything in atheism or in a materialist or naturalist worldview that can account for numbers? Now, an atheist is going to say numbers.
Yeah, numbers were made up by humans. Is that like difficult to understand? Humans made up numbers. Numbers are conceptual things that we have in our minds that help us understand the world. If there were no humans, there'd be no numbers.
Numbers are just the language we use to describe the way the world works. Yeah, I agree with that. The number 4 is 4 in English, cuatro in Spanish, quatre in French. These are words that we use, but there is something real behind those words. Mathematics.
There's a similar concept behind each of those words. So I'm wondering if this gets into the whole sense reference distinction in the philosophy of language. That you can have different senses of the same reference. Like water and H2O are different senses of the same reference. Both water and H2O and agua refer to the same thing, but they're different senses through which you refer to that thing.
Is more than just an arbitrary convention. Math is discovered. It's not just invented by human beings.
Well, that's up for debate even amongst philosophers of mathematics. I think mathematics is invented, but I think that humans can make discoveries about the mathematical systems that they develop given the axioms that they use. They can discover various properties and symmetries and relations within these systems as given by the axioms. But this notion of axiomatizing these systems and developing them, that is something that humans do. If there were no humans, there'd be no math.
Beings. 2 plus 2 is 4 in any language, whatever terms we might use to describe it. Whatever our numerals look like. We could use Roman numerals, we could use Arabic numerals, we could invent our own numerals, we could use tally marks. But the reality behind the language is there. That requires that there is a realm of immaterial objects.
No, it doesn't. It just requires such a similar concept that all of these different senses are trying to capture.
Transcendent things that are there whether or not we exist or not. An atheist who is a naturalist, who is a materialist, only believes in the realm of the physical and the material, matter and energy. As Christians,
I don't know how true that is. I don't think most people who call themselves naturalists are likely to be some form of Platonist, but maybe my understanding isn't deep enough here. I don't see why those would necessarily be contrary to one another. One could argue that there is a Platonistic realm, but it's a natural realm. It's something that is still a part of the natural world.
We understand that numbers are an expression of the mind of God. God is there. God is not made of matter. God communicates truth to us. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Numbers, which are an expression of the thinking and the mind of God, are the same yesterday, today, and forever. We need numbers in order to retool the experiment, and numbers make no sense if God is not there. The Christian God must be there for numbers to work. Yet again, the scientific experiment,
because
scientific
Jesus
method
matters to numbers.
makes
No Jesus,
sense
no numbers.
given
Sorry,
atheism,
guys.
but perfect sense given Christianity. Step number 8, we're going to analyze the data. This is where we take the deliverances of our sense experience, the measurements of the experiment, and we apply our reason to it. Now, what is presupposed in this step? We have to assume that our reasoning is a valid, truth-seeking faculty. Not that it is infallible, but just that it works and that it is aimed at truth, and that it can function in a way that can actually give us true conclusions.
Is reasoning aimed at truth? I mean, it's not something I would quibble over in a debate or a discussion, but I mean, people reason themselves. You can reason yourself into a false position. There are people that use their reasoning in a variety of idiosyncratic ways that might lead them to false beliefs.
You can't have knowledge without truth. You can't know truth if your reasoning is invalid. So does atheism give us any reason to trust our reasoning? If atheism is true, all that's going on in between your ears is chemical reactions. It's a collocation of atoms and molecules bouncing around against each other.
Well, it's a highly reductionist way of looking at it. Not necessarily untrue, but ignores a lot of the nuance there.
How do you possibly get truth or rationality or reason from a bunch of atoms bouncing into one another? You really don't. Actually, if
Concepts.
you are an atheist, you don't believe that a rational God created this world. Everything that exists in this world is the product of a non-rational process, by definition. It wasn't created by reason. That makes it non-rational. Everything that comes from a non-rational process is by definition non-rational or irrational. Anytime that the
Non-rational and irrational do not mean the same thing.
atheist attempts to use reason to analyze the data from an experiment,
Just like something being non-moral and something being immoral, that doesn't mean the same thing.
he is using something non-rational in an attempt to come to a rational conclusion. That is a contradictory idea. But wait a minute.
No, it's not. I don't hold that, like, ideas are rational, or like that views or theses, what have you, are rational. To me, rationality is something that agents do. It's something that applies to agents. And an agent is rational or is acting rationally when, excuse me, these keep slipping out, when their actions and behaviors are in accord with the reasons they have for acting and behaving. So when you are acting or behaving in a way that is consistent with how you think you should be acting or behaving based on the evaluations you make about the world, about, you know, like what your goals are, what your desires are, what your beliefs are. If you're acting in a way that is in accord with those, you're behaving rationally.
Atheist scientists analyze data all the time. Of course they can be reasonable. Of course they can be rational. Of course they can trust their reason. That's exactly right. But that's not consistent with atheism. That's consistent with Christianity.
No, look, it's consistent with Christianity. Clearly, Christians can be rational, and I think believing in Christianity is rational. But the same is true of atheism. Like, you're not giving arguments for why these things don't fall, like why atheists can't be rational. It's just the claim that they can't be.
The Bible says that God made us human beings in God's image, and that we are to reason. We are to have wisdom, knowledge, discretion, discernment, understanding. We're supposed to use our reasoning. As a matter of fact, there's a whole book of the Bible called Proverbs, which assumes that wisdom is possible, knowledge is possible, and that we should be able to reason our way toward truth.
Well, of course these things are possible. We don't need the Bible to tell us that. Not that he was necessarily making that claim, but
We don't do it perfectly. And apart from God, we will use our reason to justify all kinds of sin. But that same Bible that says that God gave us reason and that we've fallen into sin also says that we can have a renewed mind and the mind of Christ. This is why Christianity is so essential for reasoning. If you want to come to true, wise conclusions and be able to explain why you can actually trust your reasoning, you have to presuppose that the Christian worldview is true. If you don't want to acknowledge it, you still have to at least
just remember,
act like
guys,
the Christian worldview.
No Jesus, no rationality. You can't be rational without Jesus. You gotta have Jesus. Gotta have Jesus to think. Gotta have Jesus to know. You gotta have Jesus to do anything. If you don't have Jesus, you know life. You know life. You know think. You know think with no Jesus.
Is true. Yet again, the scientific method.
You know be
destroys
rational with no
atheism
Jesus.
and perfectly supports biblical Christianity. Let's go on to step 9. In step number 9, we are drawing conclusions about the world based on our limited sample size. What we're doing is we're saying if someone were to repeat this experiment in the future or in a different location, they would get the same result that we just got by running this experiment. What that assumes is uniformity in nature. Uniformity in nature says that the future...
I gotta be honest, I've never really understood this uniformity of nature. Nature is non-uniform in a variety of ways. It just blows my mind when I hear people say, oh, well, the uniformity of nature, that matters. I mean, I think I kind of get what's being said, is that, like, nature is consistent in the way that it behaves, which, I mean, there's exceptions to that even, but yeah, uniformity of nature is a slightly confusing concept to me, just in virtue of the fact that nature can and does behave non-uniformly in a variety of ways.
will be like the past, and that unobserved cases will be like observed cases. Now, given atheism, there is no reason to assume this. There is no unifying principle
Other than the fact that we see it around us.
holding the universe together. Atheists have to believe that all of the universe came from nothing.
No, they don't have to believe that, and I have yet to meet one that does.
That life arose from non-life.
Yeah. Just like the earth arose from non-earth stuff. Stars arise from non-star stuff. Like, yeah, that's how it works. Your house was built using non-house stuff. One wall is not a house, but it can make a house.
And that consciousness came from non-consciousness. The idea
Everything I just said.
of uniformity in nature goes out the window because uniformity in nature had to be violated randomly and in an uncaused way 3 times to get us here. There's
Huh? I don't even know what it means to, like, violate the uniformity of nature, if we're assuming that that means that, like, nature operates in consistent ways that can be described and understood. I don't think there's any example of, like, the way the world works being suspended to insert some, like miracles, so to speak. Nobody's got legitimate examples of miracles. They've got things that they think and maybe some other people think are miracles, but nothing that definitively draws that conclusion.
no explanation for it.
I think miracles are nomologically impossible anyway, which is a claim that I can absolutely defend, but I am not going to right now.
There's no cause.
Maybe I'll do a
it.
video
It
on
just
it. Who knows?
happened. And given atheism, anything can just happen. That is an absolute defeater for uniformity in nature. Now, the atheist is going to turn happened. And given atheism, anything can just happen.
Now he sounds like Deepak Chopra. According to quantum mechanics, anything can happen at any time for no reason. This is not... No, atheists don't think that, at least none that I've met. There aren't reasons to think that, because we think that reality is consistent. It's funny, because the theist thinks that the uniformity of nature can, in fact, be violated by God, but an atheist doesn't think that anything can violate it. That's just the way that reality is. Just remember that fact.
That is an absolute defeater for uniformity in nature. Now, the atheist is going to turn to the Christian and go, you believe that God can work miracles. You don't get uniformity in nature either. Au contraire. In the Christian worldview, Jesus Christ upholds the whole universe by the power of his word.
What does that
In
mean?
him, all things consist. That means that the strong force and weak force of the atom is consistent from day to day and across time and space because Jesus Christ is holding it together. Now,
How? How is Jesus Christ holding it together? How come that's not a part of the theories? You ever studied chromodynamics? No Jesus. Can't find Jesus anywhere. Don't know where he is. He's not there though. He's not in chromodynamics.
can Jesus do miracles? Absolutely. But in the biblical worldview, miracles are rare. In the Gospels, miracles are called signs and wonders. Why? Because a sign points to something else. A sign gets your attention and alerts you to some truth. A one-way sign, it's telling you, hey, pay attention, don't go the wrong way. Signs in the Gospels work the same way, and they're called wonders because they are astonishing. We're supposed to wonder at them. Miracles are weird. They're signs, they're wonders. The reason why
They're also nomologically impossible.
wonders is because they're unusual. Because usually God upholds the universe.
See, this is the thing. Miracles aren't just merely unusual things that could otherwise happen under the laws of nature. They're violations or suspensions of the laws of nature. They're events that, if the universe were just left to do what it does under the laws of nature, wouldn't ever happen. They're events that require divine intervention in order to occur.
In a faithful, consistent, reliable way. That assumption is vital for science. It's not God is somehow bound by the laws of nature. It's rather that Jesus Christ is faithful, and I have to assume, given my Christian worldview, that unobserved cases will be like observed cases and that the future will be like the past. Given the Christian worldview, that is a perfectly valid assumption. Let's move.
Sure, I just don't need Christianity to make that assumption. I can assume that unobserved things will behave like the light observed things, because I've observed those things to do that. Like with the oxygen that he was talking about. We know how oxygen atoms behave, even if there are certain ones we haven't observed, because we have observed other oxygen atoms, and there are no reasons why we would suspect that any other oxygen atoms would behave differently from others, all things being equal.
Move on to step number 10. This is where we communicate the results. That assumes that my mind is capable of holding an idea that corresponds to the external world, and that I can communicate that same idea to you or to somebody else using language. I have to assume that my mind is actually designed to do something like that.
I don't.
That the words that I'm saying are not just random. They are useful tools for communicating, for transferring an idea into another mind. That there's a correspondence between the physical world and my science and the mental world.
All right, I apologize, guys, but I can't hold it any longer. I have to use the restroom. I will be right back, and I will leave you with Joel. Don't lose your minds.
That's going on inside your brain. Look, I've been communicating to you this whole time, and you've been understanding what I'm saying. Maybe I didn't communicate an idea perfectly well, or maybe you've never heard of this idea before. Maybe you need to rewind and watch it again. All of this communication is totally meaningless if we are evolved stardust, if we came from pond scum, if we are nothing more than coelacanth fish who learned how to walk. If we are evolved protoplasm, then all that's going on in here is a chemical reaction. How could we possibly think that we could communicate an idea to one another? If atheism is true, and God did not design our minds for knowledge and for communicating that knowledge, we have no reason to trust that we can communicate anything or that there even is such an idea as truth. And you go, but wait a minute, atheists communicate all the time. Of course we can. We can communicate. We just do it. We are able to communicate. This happens. Yes. First of all, what I want to say is not everybody thinks the communication is possible. There are theories out there that negate God that say communication actually is possible. So this is not just some fringe idea that Joel Sedekis has made up. This is an idea that is out there in the realm of ideas and of philosophy. And you might not agree with it, but it's out there. So how are you going to contradict it? Well, if atheism really is true, then we really can't.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, because obviously I still have my earbuds, and so I heard all of that. There are species out there that communicate literally only through chemicals. So this idea that, well, your brain is just a bunch of chemical reactions, that doesn't mean anything. That doesn't mean we can't communicate. Ants communicate. I don't know if it's ants. Maybe it is pheromones. I know humans have pheromones. I know many animal species do. Do ants as well? Is that what they're called? Are they pheromones? Regardless, they communicate through like chemical bees. Bees can alert the rest of the hive that there's danger through nothing more than the emission of chemicals. So yeah, the fact that, well, your thoughts are just chemicals does not even bear on whether or not we can communicate.
Contradicted at all. But if Christianity is true, then from the very beginning of creation, God has been communicating with us, we've been communicating with God, and we have been designed to.
How does God communicate with us, though? That's what I want to know. And why does he seem to be so poor at it?
To communicate with one another. In fact, Jesus Christ is literally called the Word in Scripture. Jesus is the communication of God. He reveals God to us. As God, he speaks to us in ways we can understand and reveals truth to us. Our whole worldview is based on the possibility and utility of language for communicating ideas. If Christianity is true,
well, I think that like pretty much every worldview in humans is predicated on the idea that we can communicate with each other. Like that's not unique to Christianity.
Then we have every reason to believe that it's possible to communicate ideas from one to another. We've now looked at all 10 steps of the scientific method, and we've seen
Big
that
Face
each
with the
one
piano
relies on an assumption that makes perfect sense if biblical Christianity is true, and zero sense if atheism is true. If atheism was true, we could never engage in science at all. Thank God that the Christian worldview...
A claim that has not been defended in the 28 minutes and 37 seconds that we have been watching this video.
...really is true. And as a believer, I hope that your faith has been strengthened. I hope that this has given you just one more tool for your toolkit.
Is that me playing the piano, or is that his background music?
Share and defend the truth of the Christian message. And as always, I hope it made you think. You're a Christian man.
Okay, all right. I just we've wrapped up the video. Atheism just got absolutely obliterated, just destroyed, mollywopped, you might even say, just blown so far out of the water that the world's greatest team of astrophysicists utilizing the James Webb Space Telescope couldn't even find it. No, I joke. That was an interesting video. It was literally just pretty much pre-subbed the whole time. Well, you can't literally even exist without God, let alone any of the facets of existence that you consistently engage in despite there being no God. So yeah, it was really interesting. A lot of claiming that under atheism you can't have this, but I mean, I don't recall any meaningful arguments of substance that showed how simply having a position on a particular claim means that you can't think and you can't know and you can't assume and you can't do induction and all of these other things he claimed, that you can't communicate, you can't use language because you're all just chemicals. Chemicals don't communicate. Well, no, of course not. Chemicals don't communicate. But organisms can communicate using chemicals. So that's a thing that's real that happens in the world all the time. Yeah, I'm really sad that my atheism just got so totally obliterated. I don't even know what to do now. I just can't do any science. Just absolutely sucks. Well, folks, that's all I have for you today. It's been an hour and 15 minutes. It's been a little bit of a shorter stream, but just saw that and figured, you know what? Let's talk about this. This is entertaining to me. So I did want to just do a video talking about how atheism gets obliterated because we can't do anything at all, apparently, without this God that appears to be nowhere. So yeah, I'm gonna let you guys go, and I'm gonna continue with my evening. I hope all of you have a fantastic Tuesday evening, or I don't know, Wednesday morning. I don't know where you people live. This planet's not flat, so we have to worry about time zones and all that fanciful stuff. But I hope you all are doing well. I plan on making more content, a lot more content. It should hopefully slowly start rolling in. I want to do some more streams. So yeah, just keep an eye out for all of that. And with that, I will leave you guys to the rest of your beautiful evenings with your families and friends.